Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our session on customer segmentation. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded and that all of the attendees will be muted. However, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. In addition to that, I just want to make sure that you actually, when you're listening to this, that you think big. Think big, because even if you're a small operator, you can still do a lot of the things in a lot of the activities that larger players do. You just have to do it in a more, I guess, simplistic way with a tighter budget, but it can certainly be done. So don't think small, think big. In addition to the fact that we're going to offer one-on-ones after this session, and we will be providing a worksheet that you could fill out in order to be ready for that one-on-one. So let's get started. This session is, in essence, a follow-up on our omni-channel session where we talked about the big picture and all the elements that fall into a marketing plan, an omni-channel marketing plan for to create a strategy, and the customer segmentation piece is a piece of that puzzle, but it's a very important one to start with. I'm just letting in Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for joining. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for joining. I was saying just before starting that this session is being recorded, that we will allow for one-on-ones afterwards. So I will be sending out a worksheet. And certainly if you would like to be part of the one-on-ones, just email your information over to Laura and we will make sure to organize a time that's appropriate for you. And in that one-on-one session, we can go through your worksheet, which I'll be circulating, and we can talk about some of the elements that you had questions or that you're not sure about. Also, I was just mentioning that we should think big, because even though you may be a small player, you'll be able to do a lot of things that the bigger retailers do, but maybe with a shoestring budget as opposed to doing it in the grand way. So to get started, what exactly is customer segmentation? Like, what does it mean? At the end of the day, it's taking your customers and segmenting them and really separating them into maybe 3 or 4 different profiles to understand who they are and what makes them tick. In essence, what's going to make them purchase or come back to buy product or, be a lasting customer or a repeat customer. So the next slide basically, really talks about why spend time segmenting customers. I mean, why bother? It seems like, a difficult task possibly, but, is it really that beneficial? And really it is, because we know that retail, the nature of retail has changed. We know that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. People want to have to think of themselves as being special. And so if we're serving or we're communicating the same way to all of our customers, then they may feel that, we haven't really taken them into consideration. So we want to make sure a personalized approach is taken. And we see that in so many things today. Personalized products, going into a store and you can actually personalize your shoes or your t-shirt or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of personalization in everything that we see today from a consumer perspective. And if you spend the money or spend the time, you will save the money and you'll actually make money. So at the end of the day, taking a bit of time to segment your customers, understand them, you'll actually end up seeing that you'll end up selling more and you'll end up having happier customers or more repeat customers. So again, the advantages are understanding their customer behavior. When we talk about drive positioning, in one of our next segments, we're going to talk about how do you articulate social media content? How do you articulate, maybe you want to try to get media attention? How do you articulate about who you are to the media so that it speaks to that target audience? It speaks to the people that you're trying to reach. How do you do certain things and communicate in a certain way to make sure you touch the customer needs and you get them intrigued and interested in buying your product? It also helps decide on the retail marketing mix, because at the end of the day, of course, we talked about in the omni-channel segment, about all the different things that we could do. Of course, we can't do them all, but maybe you understand that most of your customers are a certain age group and they resonate really well with Instagram, and they resonate really well with being able to receive sort of messages through text messages, and they like the personalized approach. So, but they're 35 and under. So we need to be able to talk to them properly and talk to them on the platforms that suits them best. It also will help you with your merchandise assortment. And there's no doubt about the fact that your merchandise assortment is contingent on your sell-throughs. You've got data that you can utilize from historic sales, but you may not actually realize what you don't have that your consumers may want. So understanding your customers can help you actually understand maybe certain product lines or product elements or sizes that you're missing out on. It'll help you with that as well. And definitely gives you insights into promotional campaigns. Maybe your customers are driven by sales, or maybe the majority of your customers are driven by, certain fabrics or certain tendencies of different products. So really understanding what your customers, are looking for. And again, you may have 3 distinct customer profiles that you understand and maybe serve accordingly. So these are the 4 main types of customer segmentation. We've got geographic, we have demographic, and psychographic, and behavioral. So we'll go into what those really mean. And of course, we understand that you may not be able to find all of the details that meet these 4 criteria, or you may not be able to dig down that deep. But if you know that as much as you can, then it'll certainly help you drive the initiatives that you'll be able to help you drive sales and help you hit the customers that you're trying to target. So when we talk about geographic segmentation, of course, you may be a store that's super local, that only sells to your maybe 10-mile radius. Or you may be a store that sells online and actually, you may be selling across the country. So really you have to think about, again, who are your customers? Where are they found? If you know for sure that your customers are only in your particular geographic area, then of course, then that you don't need to be so broad with your approach. An example, which is not relative in this case here, but if you are based in Florida, that and your customer base is only in Florida, maybe in the 10-mile radius of your town, then of course you don't want to be marketing or talking or specifically targeting specific areas outside of that geographic area. And we know that that geographic profile is really a critical one, and it's an easy one for us to kind of find out, because you could see from your sales, and I would imagine to some degree you're keeping track of some of your customers, where they're from, etc. But you could also see who's following you on social media, where your online sales coming from. That's an easier one to do without having to worry about not even actually having a database, because maybe as a retailer, as a small retailer, you may not actually have a sophisticated system set up that you're capturing email addresses and a bit of information on your customers. And that is something that we need to make sure that we do, by the way, in order to understand our customers. So this is a little example of a store that we actually worked with. They started off online only, and then they opened up a store, one in Canada and one in the US. And their target, of course, is people who own dogs. But they managed to get just a little bit of information on their customers to be able to understand where the customers are located, what kind of dogs their customers have, and just a few little tidbits of information, so that when they're actually marketing to them, they're actually sending out messages that resonate with that consumer. So for them, it was really geographic, because they have a store in Florida and they have one in Toronto, in the suburbs of Toronto. And so they know that somebody living in Canada is possibly going to want to have little booties for their dogs, but of course they're not going to be marketing those booties to somebody who's living in Florida. So they managed to capture, a little bit of information online. And when their store was open, when they opened one store in each country, they basically started ensuring that they captured those minimal information to be able to actually market to them in a proper way. When we talked about the omni-channel segment last week, we talked about the fact that we could capture information, maybe with a QR code upon, receiving the receipt of a purchase, or perhaps at the purchase point in a store, you can ask for one or two little pieces of information to ensure that you know certain things. So maybe with this particular retailer, she would ask maybe the dog breed and perhaps the dog's age, and maybe where this person geographically lives, and possibly the gender of the dog. And so at that point, they could actually segment the data and serve information when they're sending out newsletters or e-blasts or online communications, and also when they're actually doing something special in terms of they're doing a in-store event. Well, maybe they're going to market differently to the different consumers based on their dog and so on. So demographic is and it's a more complex in terms of knowing this information. But again, this information could be available through social media. So if you see who's following you on social media, you can actually pull out that information and understand that possibly most of the people that are following you are women and they're under 35 years old. You may be able to get a little bit more data on them as well. And if you do have an online presence and you actually have what's called Google Analytics, which basically on your website, you could see who is actually going to your website. You can look at the data there as well. And it's very straightforward. You can see that where they're coming from geographically, kind of talks back to the earlier slide that we had, but also a little bit more information about the consumer and the person looking at you. Because of course, if you're having organic, what's called not paid traffic, we know that those are the low-hanging fruits. Those are the people who actually are interested in your product or in your store. And when you combine the age, the gender, and the income, for example, then you're able to actually serve or email or communicate with your potential customer by understanding that they're under 35, but they have a good job and they're all women. And perhaps, you would speak to them a little differently than you would maybe for somebody who possibly doesn't have a high education or is, older person who may not have the same interests. So understanding, I get at the end of the day, it's knowledge is power. Psychographic segmentation, this is a harder one to do. And this one, you may want to, again, when people come to the store or when they buy online and they're checking out, you ask them one question. And maybe the one question is, what drives you every day? Something to understand their mindset. Are they active people? Are they people who like to not exercise? Are they people who are, like to travel? So maybe you'd want to get one little tidbit from them. And again, we know that you don't have a lot of touch points. When I looked at who signed up for this particular session, we had people who had thrift shop, and then we had, different retailers with different sort of capabilities. So of course, this is a generic or a broad approach. And there's no doubt that when you actually then look at your own business, there's approaches that we could take that are easier than others. And certainly data gathering may be more complicated in certain scenarios than others, especially if maybe you don't have repeat customers. And, so depending if your customers are repeat, you'll take a different approach than if your customers are those who just may be from time to time come to the store, or they're one-offs. So this is just explaining that psychographic segmentation a little further. Lifestyle centers around how a consumer lives their life. So again, are they active? Social status, maybe it's about, the social class. So again, it goes a bit to where their income levels as well. The attitude, their personality on, do they buy when things are on sale? So if you could see that, possibly you can keep track of a customer welcome. If you keep track of a customer and you see that your customer is always buying from when you have a sale running, then you know that perhaps that customer has that kind of attitude. Activities and interests, their buying habits, their opinions, because a lot of clients perhaps want to learn, or they're much more focused on if your products are environmental, or if you have an eco-conscious approach to retailing, if maybe that's the ethos of your retail operation, et cetera. So again, does it match what the consumer is looking for? Behavioral. So I thought it'd be interesting to actually bring up this little segment down here, which is basically, again, separating your customers into one or two different segments, and understanding, are they what is their rationale in terms of how do they buy, a frequency of buying, the rationale behind their buying habits, et cetera. And I thought it would be interesting because I was on a site that actually had it very simply broken down like this. Do I like pink clothes? Do I like blue clothes, et cetera? And so maybe you have customers that have a tendency to always buy black, or always buy a certain style of product. So you could keep track of that as well. And again, it's all about taking the data that you have through online sales, if you have any, taking the data that you garner from people walking into your store. And of course, we know that we have limited capabilities, but you could even do it in an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but it's more about having that data, capturing that data, and maintaining it for future learnings. This is an example of a company that actually started off online, and they just opened up their first pop-up shop. And what they did is they actually expanded, but their first product was a weighted blanket. And the purpose of the weighted blanket was to address many issues, whether they were issues with people who may have a physical ailment, or people who had a difficult time sleeping, and the weighted blanket helped them. And then this has become a very, very popular thing. And so they just recently opened up a pop-up shop. But the reason why I'm bringing them up is this website very simply asks people to answer 2 or 3 questions to find their perfect blanket. And what they're doing by doing that is that they're capturing people's email addresses, and they're capturing their buying motivation. Why are they purchasing the product? And I just thought I'd go through a few of the slides that they asked. So wondering which blanket is right for you. So obviously this is their questionnaire, the start of the questionnaire. And by the way, when you actually answer this questionnaire, it goes into what's called a database of some sort. We use JotForm, and JotForm is basically a form that you create with these types of questions, and it gathers that information that allows you then to go back and download into an Excel spreadsheet so that you could understand your customer, or the people that are actually looking at potentially purchasing your product. So I answered a loved one on this one, and then I answered that the person had a medical condition. So why did I do that? I just wanted to see what did I get, actually. And I actually haven't received an email from this company yet. But what they're doing in the background is they're actually saying, okay, we're going to take all this data, we're going to come back to her, and now we have her name, email address, we have the purpose of her purchase, but now we actually could talk to her and understand that she's actually buying for somebody else. Maybe we could actually email her and say, hey, come into our store, have a look at maybe considering this blanket for yourself as well. So other segments that we can look at when we're categorizing our customer base is, are they technologically savvy? Again, we know when we talked about the omni-channel experience, we know that sometimes people like to receive promotions or information, or hey, we've got a new collection in the store through text messages. But they also may be, interested in other information that is sent through text messages. So really, it's about understanding the customer, what their needs are, what other values are. Do they only buy vegan products? Really, at the end of the day, it's really how broad you want to get. And if your store offers an array of different products, and I know that we've got somebody from Threads on and from OSU, and so maybe at your consignment store, maybe it's all about new products, or a new collection that just came in, or a new shipment that you just received. So maybe it's not as granular as that, because of course, if somebody's buying a thrift shop, maybe they are environmentally conscious, and that's why they actually want to buy from a thrift shop, or because they actually are looking for merchandise on, at a reduced cost. So the benefits of customer segmentation, at the end of the day, we talked about this a little bit, but really it improves your product or service. So really it helps you provide your customers what they are looking for, and it maybe allows you to establish what else could you offer. Helps you focus on the message and promotions, identifies new sales opportunities, and really gives you a competitive advantage. Because if you understand your customers, well, maybe your competitors are not actually understanding them, and you're the retailer next door to you who may have some of the same merchandise, maybe they're just not being as thoughtful in the way that they actually market to their customers and talk to them. And economies of scale is really critical as well, because if you are knowledgeable about what drives your customers, well, then you can actually be more effective in the way you do things, and you can actually maybe adjust the way that you run your business and the merchandise mix that you have, and have it so that it's much more in line with what you're going to sell. So when you think about your customers, and when you're trying to consider this opportunity, we're going to be sending you a worksheet with which will help you think this thing through. But really, there's 2 or 3 things that you may want to consider. Are there any immediate shopping traits that you can identify with your customers? Maybe you know that every one of your customer comes into your store because they know you've always got something new and exciting, or because they know that you always have that basic t-shirt or that basic item that they are looking for. Are there any blatant differences between your customers and those that you can think of? So maybe the customers you have are great, but you may have the ability to go after other customers if there's certain profiles that you actually haven't thought about. And by segmenting your customers into 2 or 3 different profiles, you'll realize that maybe there's a gap. There's a gap because perhaps your products or what you're selling can actually be interesting and to other consumers. It seems all super basic, but when you sit back and you analyze it, and it doesn't require a lot of time, it's just more understanding. Then at that point, you could say to yourself, oh, okay, maybe I need to adjust my communications, or I need to adjust my product mix to fit that segment that I may be missing. And what information would you love to know about your customers? And that, to me, that's a reverse engineering kind of thing, basically, because of the fact that what you want to know about your customers is what's going to help you determine the segmentation of your customers, so that you can actually have the product mix and market to them appropriately. When we talked about the customer segmentation and the marketing elements, or the elements that we can do as part of our omni-channel experience, we had all these elements. But when I think about this particular group, probably the most important thing would be advertising through social media, maybe an email newsletter, and perhaps using your receipts for data gathering. So if you use those 3 elements to then help you segment your customers in a way that provides you with information fairly easily, combining those three would probably be the best thing to do on a shoestring budget, because really advertising through social media doesn't have to be super expensive. You can really geo-target once you actually, get a sense of where your customers are coming from. You could utilize the newsletter. Again, maybe you have 3 newsletters that are just slightly different, going out to the 3 different segments that you've identified in terms of your customers. And perhaps maybe sometimes it's always the same, sometimes it may be the same information that you're communicating, depending on what the actual content of the newsletter is. And the receipts, well, that's a great way of gathering information about your consumer. QR code is really simple to set up. They scan, put 2-3 pieces of information at the checkout counter, and there you go. You've got information on the customer. But again, it's about knowing, what do you want to know about the customer, and what do you want to continue starting to gather about them, so you can actually further segment your customers and not make it too segmented, because then it becomes way too complicated. I had a question that was asked about customer incentives to increase walk-in traffic. And certainly that not really relevant to customer segmentation, but I wanted to answer it. To me, there's 3 things. One is referrals. Perhaps you can actually have customers refer other customers and incentivize them to do so. So maybe, again, it's your newsletter. You have existing customers, and if they either bring in a friend, or they basically, you speak to them through the newsletter or through social media to do some sort of a campaign around referrals. And the social media campaign could be something, again, where you're targeting specific customers or specific markets. And you may want to do it again, you'd want to do it with people that that have purchased from you. Or you just do it through a social media campaign, and you create an incentive that way, that you have people, and you maybe create a limited time where perhaps you say, between this day and that day, you have a certain incentive to come in and purchase, so you create a time sensitive thing. I would say that if you think about pop-ups, for example, they're time sensitive, and the reason why they do really well is because they have a window of opportunity. If you don't go, you miss out. So that whole fear of missing out, you could create that, establish that through different activities such as social media, etc. And milestones. You may want to use a specific milestone where perhaps your 100th anniversary, 50th anniversary, 10th anniversary, whatever it may be, but creating, again, a specific thematic activity where it drives people to come into the store because you're doing something special for that particular moment. So again, it's really about creating time-sensitive activities, or utilizing existing customers that have had a great experience with you to drive other business. So now I'd like to open the floor, the virtual floor, to any questions that you may have. So if we don't have any questions today, what I'd like to do is I'll make sure that you get the worksheet for this session, which will allow you to actually think through, how do you segment your customers? How do you see the profiles, et cetera? You'll see in the sheet, it's got some questions, and then follow from that particular exercise. We could do our one-on-ones when it's appropriate for you, if you'd like, and they'll be scheduled sometime this week. So please do email if you have an interest in having one-on-ones. I'll make sure that you get the worksheet. And I thank you very much for your time. The next session is on November 14th, and it's on content development, which is really critical to this piece, because once you segment your customers, then how do you talk to them? How do you put content that resonates with them? And again, through what channels? Through social media, through perhaps your website. How are you articulating who you are on your website? How do you articulate in store? Do you have a specific repeat sort of approach, so that when people come in, the experience is always the same? and how do you communicate with all of the elements, all the touch points. So it's really critical. I want to thank you very much for your time. And I have a question here. Thank you very much, Sarah. And look forward to seeing you next week. Have a lovely day.